Chapter 24. Someone moved him, Emma declared as Sydney drove them away from Fear Lake. That's the only explanation. Sydney turned the heater on and gripped the steering wheel tightly. Emma is right, she thought. Somebody found Jason's body and took it out of the lake. But who? And why? It can't be the police, Emma said as if she'd read Sydney's mind. Why not? Because the police would have told his parents, and everyone would know that Jason is dead, and they'd be asking questions all over the place, Emma replied. You know, who saw him last, who was with him? They would have come looking for us already. Sydney turned the heater up higher. Hot air blasted out, but she still couldn't stop shaking. Then it had to be whoever saw us that night, she murmured through clenched teeth. Yeah. Slumped in the passenger seat, Emma held her hands in front of the heating vent. Do you think someone is after the money? She asked. Nobody knows it's there but us, Sydney reminded her. Whoever was in the woods didn't see it. Maybe Jason told somebody about it, Emma suggested. You told Jason, remember? And he could have told someone else. I bet he did, she added with a bitter laugh. I bet he bragged his big mouth off about it to somebody. What do you think, Sid? I don't know, Sydney replied softly. I don't have any idea what's going on. The only thing I know for sure, she thought, is that everything has gone wrong. Horribly wrong. After dropping Emma off at her house, Sydney drove home in a daze. As soon as she pulled around to the garage, her heart sank. Both of her parents' cars were home. I can't face Mom and Dad now, she thought. I just can't. No way can I come up with an excuse for being totally soaked and covered with lake slime. Easing her car into the garage, Sydney cut the motor and climbed out. She left the garage door open so that the noise wouldn't alert her parents. Then she walked behind the garage, around the pool, and over to the west wing of the house. Standing in the damp grass, she gazed up at the wooden deck jutting out from her bedroom. Stairs led up to the deck, and sliding glass doors opened into her room. Please don't let the doors be locked, she pleaded silently. Carrying her shoes, Sydney quickly tiptoed up the steps and onto the deck. A phone rang inside the house. Sydney's heart raced as she heard footsteps. Then her mother's voice carried through an open window. She's talking to my grandmother, Sydney realized. They'll be on the phone for at least half an hour, and Dad is probably playing computer chess by himself, as he usually does before dinner. Sydney trotted across the deck and carefully pulled on the sliding door. It slid open soundlessly on its track. Sighing with relief, Sydney stepped into her bedroom. Without even turning on a light, she hurried into her bathroom and took the hottest shower she could stand. Finally warm, she dried off and slipped into her thick white bathrobe. As she came out of the bathroom, someone rapped lightly on her door. Sydney, her mother called. Are you in there? Yes, I just got out of the shower. Sydney started for the door, then stopped. She wasn't soaked anymore, but she knew her face would show that something was wrong. I came in by my deck because my shoes were all muddy. Fine. Your father and I are going to a fundraising dinner in about an hour, her mother said. You'll have to make some dinner for yourself. Okay. Sydney felt a wave of nausea at the thought of food. How did the test go? Sydney's mind went blank. What test? I'm sure you did great, her mother called in. History is your best subject. Right. History. It was pretty hard, Sydney told her. Anyway, Mom, I'm tired. I think I'll just hang out for a while. All right. I'll let you know when we leave. Thank goodness her mother wasn't the type to barge in, Sydney thought. But she knew she couldn't hold up in her room forever. Don't worry about that now, she told herself. You have enough to worry about. Sydney rushed to the bed and turned on the lamp. Soft light spilled out over the thick green comforter and the stuffed animals piled on top of the pillows. Sydney reached for Goldie, a fat brown teddy bear she'd had since she was 3. As Sydney lifted the bear from the bed, something else came with it. Something long and red tied around Goldie's leg. Sydney gasped as she stared at it. My belt, she realized. My red belt. The belt Emma used to tie the rock to Jason. Who put it here? Who tied it around Goldie's leg and put it in my room? With a cry, Sydney ripped the belt off. As she did, something white fluttered down and landed on the bed. Another piece of white paper, folded in half. Sydney's mouth went dry. Her heart began to hammer. She picked up the paper and unfolded it. Inside was a one-word message. Murderer. But this message had been written by hand. Sydney's pulse thundered in her ears as she stared at it. She recognized the handwriting. She knew who wrote this note. Jason. Chapter 25. A scream of horror rose in Sydney's throat. She swayed on her feet. The note slipped from her hand and dropped to the bed. It landed next to the red belt. Sydney sank onto the bed, sick and terrified. As she collapsed against the pillows, her hand flew out and hit the telephone. Emma, she thought, bolting up again. I have to tell her. She grasped the phone and dragged it off the table. The numbers blurred in front of her eyes. Finally, she managed to punch in Emma's number. Hello? Emma's voice sounded wary. Emma, it's me, Sydney cried, her voice trembling. Sid, I'm really glad you... Emma, I know what's happening, Sydney interrupted. I know who sent me the note and put the ring in my locker. Sid, slow down, Emma urged. You're going too fast. I can't understand you. Sydney choked back a sob. She forced herself to take a deep breath. Finally, she was able to talk again. Remember my red belt? She asked. The one you used to tie the rock to Jason? Yes, of course. It's here, in my room, Sydney cried. I found it just now. Somebody tied it around Goldie's leg. Whose leg? Goldie, my old... Oh, what difference does it make? The belt is here, Sydney cried. And there was a note, too. It said, murderer. Emma gasped. Somebody put the belt and the note in my room, and I know who it was, Sydney announced. Who? Emma demanded anxiously. Jason. Emma gasped again. Whoa, Sydney. Listen to me. Sydney jumped up and began pacing back and forth by the bed. The note is in Jason's handwriting, Emma. I'd know it anywhere. Emma remained silent. Don't you get it? Sydney continued. It's not somebody who saw us out in the woods. It's Jason himself. Her voice rose. He was dead, right, Emma? You were sure he was dead? Yes, he was dead, Emma replied in a whisper. Sydney was silent for a moment. Do you believe in ghosts? She asked in a tiny voice. I don't know. Sid, I was just about to call you, Emma broke in. I got a note, too, with the same word on it. Murderer. You see? Sydney cried. It's him. It's Jason. Who else could it be? Somebody from school, Emma replied. Someone Jason talked to? That's what I thought the second I saw the note. What about the handwriting? Someone copied it, Emma declared. Now listen, Sid. We have to figure this out. Someone wants to scare us. Really bad. We can't get hysterical. We have to think. I can't, Sydney cried, her voice rising even higher. I can hardly breathe. I almost fainted when I saw the note, Emma. I'm so scared, and I don't know what to do. I'm coming right over, Emma said. I'll borrow my neighbor's car. Hang in there. After Emma hung up, Sydney held onto the phone until it beeped, startling her. She hung it up and began pacing the room again. Every time she turned, she saw the red belt and the small sheet of white paper lying on the bed next to Goldie. I have to get out of here, she thought. I can't stand being in this room. Still in her bathrobe, Sydney pulled open the sliding door, ran down the deck steps and around the house to the garage to wait for Emma. Hurry, Emma, she thought, pacing barefoot up and down the rough cobblestones. I can't keep it together much longer. I'm going to start shrieking my head off any second. At last, headlights rounded the corner of the house. A dark brown station wagon pulled to a stop. Emma climbed out. Sydney ran over and threw her arms around her friend. Thank goodness you're here, she cried, hugging Emma tightly. I'm so scared. Shh, Emma murmured. She held her by the arms. Sid, what are you doing out here like this? Your hair's all wet and you're barefoot? Waiting. I couldn't wait inside, Sydney told her. I took a shower. That's why my hair is wet. Then I got out of the shower, and that's when I found the belt and... She broke off. Emma squeezed her arms. Sid, please, try to hold on. I'm trying, Sydney gasped, but I'm so scared. Aren't you? First Jason's school ring, and now the belt. How did the belt get here? She shuddered. Do you believe in ghosts, Emma? I never did, but now... Emma took hold of Sydney's arms again. You've got to keep it together, Sydney, she declared. Her blue eyes were filled with worry. You're really losing it? You look terrible, and you're not making any sense. I can't help it. You have to. Emma gave Sydney a little shake, then put an arm around her shoulders. Let's go to your room, okay? Show me the belt and the note. Sydney took a deep breath and nodded. Okay, but we have to go in through my deck. I don't want to run into my parents. Definitely not, Emma agreed. She took Sydney's arm and walked her up the deck steps. Emma pushed the sliding door all the way open. Then she tugged gently on Sydney's sleeve. Come on, Sid, show me the belt. Sydney stepped hesitantly through the door. Her eyes snapped immediately to the bed. Oh no, I don't believe it, she cried. Chapter 26. They're gone! Sydney rushed to the bed. The belt, the note, they're both gone, Emma. You left them on the bed? Emma stammered. Sydney nodded. She scanned the carpet. Empty. She ran around to the other side of the bed, dropped to her knees, and searched underneath. No note, no belt. They were right here, Sydney insisted, pounding her fist on the mattress. Emma, they were right here 10 minutes ago. Emma strode to the bed and picked up the teddy bear. That's Goldie, Sydney told her. The belt was tied around his leg. See the mud? Some of it came off on his fur. Do you see it? Emma checked out the bear's legs and arms. Then she turned to Sydney. I don't see any mud on him. Sydney snatched the bear from Emma's hands and carefully inspected each leg. No mud. She tossed the bear across the room. It landed with a soft plop next to the door. This is impossible, she gasped. I know what I saw. They couldn't have just disappeared. Frantic to find the note and belt, Sydney scooped up the rest of the stuffed animals and threw them on the floor. She shoved the pillows off and pulled the comforter down. Sydney, stop, Emma told her. They wouldn't be under the covers. They have to be. Sydney wadded the comforter into a big ball and tossed it aside. They have to be here someplace. She yanked the sheets off and stared at the bare mattress, panting in fear and frustration. Sydney, there's nothing there, Emma cried. Okay, so they're not on the bed. Wading through the mound of stuffed animals, Sydney crossed the room to her closet. She pulled open the closet door and stepped inside. Sydney, come on, Emma cried. They're not in the closet. Right, Sydney backed out. Her head felt about to explode. They couldn't hop off the bed and hang themselves up, could they? She scowled as she glanced around the room. But they were here before, so they have to be here now. As Sydney strode back to the bed, Emma grabbed her arm. Sydney, forget it. What do you mean? The belt and the note aren't here, Emma declared. Forget looking for them. But they were here, Sydney insisted. You think I made them up? No, but, Emma paused. But what? Sydney pulled her arm away. You think I'm crazy? Of course not. But Sid, you're not thinking clearly, Emma replied. You're not sleeping or eating and you have nightmares? And look around. Look what you did to your room just now. Sydney gazed around the room. Stuffed animals scattered all over the place. Sheets dragged to the floor, the comforter spilling off the chair. It's a wreck, Emma said softly. And if I didn't stop you, you'd turn the whole house upside down looking for that belt and the note? They were here, Sydney whispered. They were here. You've got to get a grip, Sid. Please? Emma squeezed her arm. I need you. I need your help. I think you should go to sleep. Everything will seem better in the morning. I know it will. I would love to sleep, Sydney sighed, but I'm afraid I'll have a nightmare. I don't think you will, Emma told her. You're exhausted. You'll probably sleep for 12 hours and not have a single dream. A dreamless sleep, Sydney thought. That would be wonderful. Emma picked up the tangled sheets. I'll help you make the bed, okay? Sydney nodded, then jumped as someone tapped on the door. Sydney, are you on the phone? Her mother called. I heard voices. I don't want her to see me, Sydney whispered. She'll know something's wrong. It's me, Mrs. Shue, Emma called back quickly. Emma, I stopped by to drop off some English notes. Sydney is in the bathroom. Okay, bye, Emma. Tell Sydney we're leaving. As her mother's footsteps faded away, Sydney took a shuddering breath. She stood in the middle of the room while Emma remade the bed. There, Emma plopped a handful of stuffed animals on top of the pillows and smiled. Ready to go to sleep? Sydney gazed at the bed, thinking about the red belt. Sid? I'll walk you downstairs, Sydney told her. I want to get a Coke or something. But you'll come back up and go to sleep, right? You promise me? Emma insisted. Sure. Downstairs in a marble-floored foyer, Emma gave Sydney a hug. I'm so worried about you, Sid. Sydney forced a smile. I'll be okay. Really. Have hot chocolate instead of soda, Emma suggested. It will help you sleep. Right. Sydney pulled open the door and watched as Emma strode away. In a few moments, the station wagon's headlights swept around the side of the house. The station wagon pulled down the long driveway and out of sight. Sydney stood there for another minute, then shut the door and started back upstairs. She didn't want hot chocolate. She didn't want to sleep either. She wanted to find that belt and that note. They were there, she told herself. I saw them. I'll find them. Won't I? Upstairs, she threw open her bedroom door and flipped on the light switch. And screamed. Jason hunched in front of the sliding deck door, staring at her with dead, sunken eyes. Chapter 27. Sydney stood frozen, her hand still on the light switch. Her heart seemed to stop. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing the horrible figure to disappear, but when she opened her eyes, Jason still stood across the room. Mud and pond scum covered his clothes. Dark red blood matted his hair and formed a dried, crusty smear on his shoulders. The skin on his hands and face had turned greenish-black. Like moldy bread, Sydney thought. He's rotting, she realized. I can smell him from here. He's dead and rotting. Jason's lips quivered. A piece of rotting flesh slid from his bottom lip and slithered to the floor. His teeth were cracked and covered with green slime. Sydney, Jason rasped. His voice sounded hollow, as if from far away. Dead. He is dead, Sydney thought in horror. I'm not dreaming. I'm not imagining it. Jason has come back from the dead. Sydney, Jason rasped again. Sydney almost choked from the stench of his rotting skin. She wanted to cover her nose, but her hand slipped from the light switch and fell limply to her side. Jason stared at her, his eyes sunk deep in his skull, and then he took a lurching step toward her. Something was tied around one of his legs, something long and muddy and red. My belt, Sydney realized. The end of the belt flapped as Jason lurched forward. Sydney wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. She had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. Jason took another step. You killed me, he choked out. No, Sydney wanted to scream, but she couldn't move. She couldn't even shake her head. Emma killed me, and you watched, Jason's hollow voice accused. Emma murdered me, and you helped her. Whimpering in terror, Sydney slid down the wall to the rug. Her hand touched something soft and furry. Goldie. With another whimper, she dragged a teddy bear onto her lap. Jason came closer. The rotting stench grew stronger. The air turned cold. Emma killed me, Jason whispered. You killed me. Sydney fell onto her side. She drew her legs up to her chest. You killed me. You killed me. Clutching the bear in both hands, Sydney curled herself into a tight ball. Jason grew closer. Sydney whimpered. She smelled his rotting flesh. She heard his dead, empty voice. You killed me, he repeated. You killed me. And then Jason's shadow rolled over her, and she felt the cold of death. Chapter 28. Emma tapped her foot and glanced nervously around the hospital waiting room. In spite of the colorful pictures on the walls and the cheerful yellow chairs, the place gave her the creeps. She hated hospitals. Deal with it, she told herself. You have to be here. You have to find out if everything is going to be all right. Magazines had been fanned out across every tabletop in the room. Emma took one and flipped through it and then slapped it back on the table. She felt too edgy to read. She glanced at the big wall clock. Only 2 minutes had passed since she checked it last. With a nervous sigh, she stood up and paced back and forth in the small waiting room, forcing herself not to check the time again. An elevator bell pinged somewhere down the hall. 2 nurses strode by, talking softly. What's taking so long? Emma wondered. Why isn't there any word yet? Go get another soda, she told herself. You'll kill at least 5 minutes that way. As Emma rummaged in her bag for some change, the door across the hall whooshed open. Emma jumped to her feet and rushed into the hall, her heart pounding. A white-coated doctor stood in the doorway, turning his head to talk to someone behind him. I thought she was ready to see you, the doctor said, but she can't let go of this idea that you're dead. I'm sorry. The doctor emerged from the doorway. Jason followed him. The door whooshed shut behind them. The doctor put his hand on Jason's shoulder. I'm sorry, he repeated gravely. I understand, Jason murmured. I just hate to see her this way. We used to be so close. He took a deep breath and gazed at the floor. And now she thinks I'm some kind of monster. Giving Jason's shoulder a sympathetic squeeze, the doctor nodded at Emma, then strode away. Jason stared at the floor a moment longer, then he raised his sad blue eyes to Emma. Let's get out of this place. Silently, the two of them left the hospital and walked out to the parking lot together. Jason unlocked his car and they climbed inside. Emma swept her long hair back and turned to Jason. Well? She demanded. Jason grinned at her, with no trace of sorrow in his eyes. You are right. Sydney is completely nuts. Emma breathed a sigh of relief. I knew it would work. I knew she would crack if she thought you had come back from the dead to haunt her. Yeah, she just holds onto that teddy bear and twists her hair around her fingers like a baby, Jason said. She always did that when she was nervous, Emma told him. She never could handle pressure. And now she is gone, man. Totally flipped, Jason declared. She'll be in that hospital forever. Emma smiled in satisfaction. I told you, we could get rid of her this way. Jason started the car and revved the engine. As they peeled out of the parking lot, Emma glanced back at the red brick hospital building. She knew Sydney's parents would take her out of there soon. They'd put her in some private place, with gardens and ponds and rooms as big as Emma's house, and then Sydney would go home. But her parents would never believe her story. It will cost them a fortune, Emma thought. But so what? They can afford it. That was why Emma had gone to Jason as soon as she and Sydney found the bag of money. Sydney didn't need it. She was already rich. Right from the start, Emma worried that Sydney wouldn't keep their secret. Sooner or later, Sydney's conscience would get the better of her. Sydney would start to feel guiltier and guiltier. She'd tell her parents about the money, or she'd tell the police. Emma couldn't allow that. Emma really needed that money, and she knew that Jason needed it too. She and Jason had been sneaking out together for weeks. They pretended not to like each other. They didn't want Sydney to catch on. Now they had the money, and they had each other. Emma glanced over at Jason. She chuckled to herself. When she told him her plan to drive Sydney nuts, Jason leaped at the chance to help. What's so funny? Jason asked. I was just thinking how easy it was to fake your death, Emma told him. Sydney was so stupid that night at the lake. She never even checked to see if you were breathing or not. She just took my word for it. Lucky us, Jason murmured. Yeah, that was the trickiest part, Emma agreed. After that, I knew everything would be great. She shook her head. Later, when I was supposed to be dumping you in the water, she heard us talking, and she thought someone else was in the woods. She didn't have a clue. Emma laughed again. It was so easy. Enough yakking about it, Jason told her. It's over, right? We're safe and in the clear, so let's go dig up the money. What a good idea, Emma exclaimed. Then, straight to the mall. I'm really going to celebrate. For the first time in my whole life, I can really shop till I drop. Emma stood in front of the three-way mirror at Hidebound, an expensive leather shop. She gazed at her reflection. The leather jacket felt buttery soft, and it fit her perfectly. It made her look rich, too. You are rich, she reminded herself with a grin. She and Jason had raced to the woods and dug up the money bag. Wow, what a thrill! She brushed the dirt off the bag and practically tore it open. She grabbed 2 stacks of 50s, stuffed one stack in her jeans pocket, tossed the other stack to Jason. Then they heaved the bag into the trunk of his car and took off on their shopping spree. Now she grinned at her reflection in the leather jacket. She glanced at the price tag dangling from the sleeve. $600. No big deal. Are you about done? Jason asked impatiently. Emma turned to him. I'm trying to decide whether to get this in black or brown. She spun around, showing off the black jacket. What do you think? Jason shrugged. That one looks awesome. Hurry up, will you? I want to go next door and check out the widescreen televisions. Okay. Emma walked over to a cashier. She eased out of the jacket and draped it across the counter. I'd like to take this, she said. The salesman, a young, red-haired man in a leather sports coat, glanced at the price tag. A very good choice, he said. This is Italian leather, one of our best buys. He raised his eyes to Emma. How would you like to pay for this? He asked. I'll pay cash, Emma told him. She felt so excited, her whole body tingled. So this was what it felt like to be rich. She pulled a stack of $50 bills from her pocket and counted out $600. Then she handed the money to the cashier. He took the bills and began shuffling through them, counting. Then he stopped and laughed. What's so funny? Emma demanded. These are really good, the clerk said, still snickering. Huh? Good? Emma cried. The clerk handed the bills back to her. She and Jason held them close and examined them. It took Emma a few seconds to see what the clerk was talking about. She was totally confused until she read the words across the top of the bill, United States of America, and then her eyes lowered to the engraved portrait of Benjamin Franklin. His eyes were crossed and he wore a backwards baseball cap over his wig. Emma grabbed the counter to keep herself from falling. Slowly, she raised her gaze to the red-haired sales clerk. Did you bring any real money? He asked. This has been a Nightfall Audiobooks production of The Rich Girl by R.L. Stine, a Fear Street novel, Book 44. Hi, this is Chris again with Nightfall Audiobooks. Thank you very much for joining me for my production of The Rich Girl. The end was great. I can't believe that is well done. Emma and Jason were really dating for a couple of weeks in secret. Sydney didn't know anything about it. And then when Sydney and Emma found the money in the dumpster, they decided to drive Sydney crazy so no one would believe her story about her finding the money with Emma. And then come to find out it's fake money all along. That's priceless. That is so awesome. I haven't read this before, so I'm reading the last chapter, and it's going on and on and on about how Emma likes the coat and what color should she get it in. And Jason's like, yeah, well, finish up. I want to go buy some new TVs. I'm like, okay, so when is the other foot going to fall? Where's the twist here? And I got the idea. I'm like, it's fake money, isn't it? Then the clerk verified it and said, hey, this is fake money. Do you have any real money? So these two people drove their friend insane and committed her to a life of psychiatric help for no reason. That is evil. That is messed up. Wow. Absolutely well done. I am very, very pleased with this book. The ending helps make up for it being so short. If you want to read some really, really good Fear Street, read The Rich Girl, because man, the twist at the end, that is supreme. I had a lot of fun doing this. This was a very fast read. It was engaging. So thank you again for joining me for my production of The Rich Girl. If you want to get in touch with me, you can write me an email, nightfallaudiobooks@gmail.com. I am also on YouTube at Nightfall Audiobooks. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. I love hearing what you have to say. This book was a recommendation by a listener via the comment section. So this is for you, and you know who you are. Thank you very much for recommending this novel. It was a lot of fun to read. So tell your friends, tell your mom, tell whoever you think would like to listen to me tell them tales from R.L. Stine. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you next time.